David Green, Bill High, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
So glad to be here, John.
Thank you for offering to
Man,
talk
what
to us
what an
today.
honor it is to have both of you guys on the podcast. I loved your book. I love the impact of it already in my life and the impact it's going to have on our listener and our viewer lives after they get through this podcast and then go out to the store and check it out for themselves. But I have a question for each of you. The first one is to Bill. Bill, if you had to introduce yourself, not the long rambling introduction I gave you, but if we bumped into each other at an airport and I said, "My name is John, tell me about you," in one sentence, how do you introduce yourself?
Well, of course, I've got the best lawyer name ever, Bill High. So that's my joke. Some people got to think about that one, but I just stole that from you, David. Usually David picks on me, but
Yeah.
there you go.
It's not hard to pick on an attorney, but anyway.
First time I heard that joke was in your book, and I laughed out loud when I read it. I'm raised by a father attorney, a grandfather attorney, two sibling attorneys, and sometimes the bill is high. So
Yeah.
Bill is a recovering attorney. What do you do today, though, Bill?
Yeah, I did practice law for about 20 years, moved in the charitable world, but over the last 15 years or so, been doing a lot of family business consulting, helping families think and plan for generations, a theme of the book.
Hmm. David Green, if you and I were to bump into each other in an airport and I introduce myself and you introduce yourself back, what do you say about you?
Well, I think I would say that I'm David Green and I'm married to Barbara Green for 65 years. And I've got about 48. I say about because it's counting children and grandchildren and great grandchildren. And the most important thing in my life is to see all of us to make heaven as our home.
So one thing you did not say, but I think many of our listeners and viewers know it about you even before they clicked into the link, is you are also the founder of a little business called Hobby Lobby.
That's right. So I don't know that that's as important to me as my marriage and my children and the ministry that God has given us to do. And this podcast is one of them. We need to do all we can do to let people know how Jesus died for them.
Tell me about where you first learned that. I mean, you're so well known for the work you do and for the impact that you've had around the country and around the world. And yet, from very humble beginnings, this all started. Take me back to childhood.
Yeah, my mother and dad were pastors of small churches. In fact, probably we never had a church over 100. So we grew up without a lot of finance, but at the same time, we saw God just give us what we needed, not what we want. And I don't know that I should say what we wanted because we grew up not wanting a lot of things. And that's what I love about my mother is the fact she didn't want more than she had. And by the way, my mother died in the hands of her daughter. And she says, "Do you see them? Do you see them?" And Esther said, "Well, what?" She said, "Angels." And then she passed away. So my mother, I tell people, was one of the most rich persons I've ever seen in my life because she wanted nothing this world had. She had marriage that lasted for life, 6 children that served the Lord. She had everything that she wanted. And so that's the kind of life that has influenced me to try to be like my mother and my father for that matter.
And I'm dear friends with a man whose neighbor had a daughter who just passed away, and they were not believers. So this story isn't prescribed, but the little girl was 8 years old when she was dying, and she looked up to her dad and she said, "Daddy, do you see them?" And he said, "What are you
Yeah.
talking about?" Then she said, "The angels." And then she says, "And there's a man on a step, and he's asking if it's okay if he washes my feet."
Oh my.
And with that, she shuts her eyes and she passes away.
Yeah.
So your mother got a glimpse into something that I think, God
Right.
willing, the rest of us might one day get a glimpse
Yeah.
into.
Yeah. That's what obviously helps me today be who I want to be is to be like my parents. They were godly people.
Organizational, you worked at a company called TGNY.
Right,
Tell me
right.
about that.
I worked for 13 years for TGNY and I learned a lot. I learned a lot of what to do and a whole lot of what not to do. It was long hours working on Sundays, 6, 7 days a week. And so from that, it really helped me with Hobby Lobby of what I wanted to have God work with us and to create something a little bit different than where I came from.
Mm. I remember it. I've read a couple times and heard you share in the past that you used to tell your mother about all the great things you were doing.
Yeah,
I
I would
achieved
get.
this and I achieved that, Mom. And she always had a response to you.
Yeah, their all response is, "David, what are you doing for the Lord?" And to be honest, as a preacher's son, I wasn't thinking so much about that early on. And so it was good to have a mother that helped redirect my thoughts of what are you doing for the Lord? And that's true for all of us. That's what's going to count. So hopefully we're all learning that. And it took me a few years to learn that more than it should have, but hopefully I've learned that what are you doing for the Lord is the question she would ask. I don't think she cared if I was the president of the United States. I don't think it would mean a thing to her, but what are you doing for the Lord? So I think I got that. I know I got that from my parents.
When you were putting together picture frames in your garage, using slave labor, your children and your wife,
Right,
and everything
right.
else you were doing in the early days,
Mhm.
what was your vision as you looked forward organizationally?
I thought a little bit about multiple stores because I came from multiple stores. That I thought a little bit, but I obviously didn't think about today we've got about 1,100 stores and we'll do about 8 billion. I was not thinking that. In fact, when I was at TGNY, I was thinking about the biggest goal I had was being a store manager. And so all of a sudden that begins to change. And it changed when we started making frames in our living room is the fact that we wanted a store. And I don't know that I thought about more than one or two at first, but then it becomes a ministry. So we wanted to have more stores to do more ministry. So that's how we see a bigger company, strictly by doing more ministry. I make less than I did 25 years ago when we had a few stores, because this is not about what it's about. It's not about me, although I do well. I don't need more than what I receive, and nor do I care for that. But God is allowing us to be a bigger company, to do more ministry, and that's what we would like to do, and that's how we see the future.
So, David, one more question for you, then I'm going to switch over to your partner in crime here in a moment. But when I do speeches around the country, our clients always fill out a questionnaire. And there are 13 questions about what they want to accomplish and what they currently are dealing with and what success looks like. And somewhere in that questionnaire is what topics do you want John to stay away from? And one of the answers they always give, usually it's politics and faith. You have you've incorporated this in an undivided way into your life organizationally. Where most people think they should live separately, you brought them together as one. Tell me about that decision.
I don't know how you would live any other way. Our lives are not on Sunday, we're a Christian and we're someone different. I have never, because of my upbringing, I guess, I always see my life as one thing, and that is doing all I can. God has created us all for a purpose. I don't care if you're a cook or if you're a merchant or whatever. And so, what is my purpose? And I think it's to tell as many people about Christ as I possibly can. And that's why we do crazy things like podcasts, by the way, and books and things of this nature. All we can do, let's do all we can do. And Hobby Lobby does all it can do. So we're, by the way, asking God for guidance because we need his guidance and we ask for it.
Bill, hopefully I haven't rocked you to sleep as I was dancing with your partner for a moment. So wake back up, man. I need your attention here for a moment. Tell our listeners again about the work you're doing generally in the marketplace.
Well, it's a lot of fun, but at the end of the day, I can boil it down to this, is we're just really trying to equip families how they succeed today and then for generations to come. Nobody starts out having a family thinking, boy, I'd sure like to mess them up and, not have my kids turn away from my values. That's the greatest grief a mother or father could have, is that kids would walk away from
Right.
their values. But there really are practical things that families can do to succeed not only today, but for generations to come. Is it possible for a family to succeed for the next 100 years? And the answer is yes. If you clearly define your vision, mission, and values, that's your
Mm.
first step.
So David shared about growing up with this warrior mother and this incredible father and this faithful family and this safe community. And they may not have had everything they wanted, but they certainly had everything they needed. You grew up in a very, very, very different home. And I was moved deeply in learning more about not only the work you're doing today, but from where it originated, because the journey has been wild, man. So take us back to your childhood.
Yeah, it's a very tough childhood. My dad was the oldest of eight, lived in a three-room log cabin in the hills of the Missouri Ozarks. So you can do the math on that and see how that all worked out, but very poor. joined the service, met my mom in Japan. He was stationed over there, but brought her back to the States. So you have a Japanese, full-blood Japanese, living in the hills of the Missouri Ozarks post World War II. Not really a cool thing to be going on, but we were poor, man. And I know we were much poorer than David was.
No
We
way,
were,
no way, no way.
we were a welfare family. Salvation Army brought us Christmas gifts, pretty crummy gifts at the time. And then he died. He died of cancer. I was 12 years old, and my mom was left with 6 kids to raise. But it was in that moment of despair that God became the father to the fatherless and a defender of the widow. So my life got better. I mean, and that might be hard to say in this moment, but God really did step in, take care of us. Part of the fun story is that my mom will turn 97 in about 3 weeks, and she lives with us now. And
Okay.
so we're actually writing down her story, and we're working on a book for her that we'll give to the family and just tell some of that journey.
My life got better after my father passed away. I know you didn't mean it that harshly. Would you give me one example of what you're saying, though, when you say that?
Well, one of the things that became clear over time is that I could never fully know my earthly father. And that's true for all of us. As much as we'd like to have the perfect relationship, we're never going to completely know them because we're broken people. But God did say, "Hey, I want you to know me because you can know me fully and completely, ultimately in heaven for sure." And so God became that father. So long over time, and there were people who stepped into my life and became encouragers and mentors and teachers in a way that my father could not. And I mean, I look back now and I'm very grateful for my father, notwithstanding all the trouble that we went through, because, he was still my dad and I
Hmm.
still love him, care for him, even though I know that he had a tough journey too.
Hmm. My grandpa was an attorney, and then my dad became one, and then two of my siblings became one. I know in David's past, a bunch of his siblings became pastors. You didn't have any role model necessarily to look up to in the family on what you might do professionally. Where did this idea of becoming an attorney grow out of?
I thought I was going to be a teacher and a coach. I was a baseball player, and that's really what I wanted to do is I wanted to coach baseball at a high school level. But I had a friend who encouraged me to go to law school. And, I applied to about 6, 7 law schools, but the very last law school I applied to gave me a full ride. So God just opened up the doors and said, "You ought to go to law school." And it wasn't until much later that I figured out that I had a good lawyer name.
Legacy Stone. Tell me about the work you all do, and then I want to hear where you and David met.
Our ministry of Legacy Stone is we build small group curriculum for the local church. So we really equip families, every family. Our ideal family is a young family, but we'll help those families write their family vision, mission, values, and just become clear about the direction that they're going. We help families with codes of conduct, and what are the rules of the game on how you're going to disagree with one another. And we just finished filming our third set of curriculum about how do you build effective family cultures. So that's our big ministry is how do we get this message about generational family out to the local church, not only in the US, but around the globe.
And then where did you and David bump into each other?
David and I met in a Hobby Lobby conference room. And it was actually because of his oldest son who had been speaking at an event in Kansas City that I just happened to show up for. And this is 25 years ago when I met him. And I didn't think too much of that meeting, but probably a couple months later, his oldest son called me and said, "Hey, we've got an issue here. Do you know the answer?" And I'm like, "Yeah, here's how you solve it." So I came down to Hobby Lobby and walked into a Hobby Lobby conference room, met with their team. David was the last guy in the room. He pops in and says, "What do you got?" And I says, "Well, here's how you solve it." And then he left. So that was how we met the first time.
Mr. Green, is that about how you remember it?
I don't remember it that way, but if he says so, go with it, maybe so. But Bill has been a great help for us with our mission, vision, values, having a hard copy. This is who and what we are as a family, and I think every family needs it. And Bill was very instrumental in us putting all that together.
David, you lead, and I know you don't love this, but it has been entrusted for you to steward forward this multi-billion-dollar business and the complexity of doing that generationally with a bunch of kids and a bunch of grandbabies and a bunch of grandbabies. So for us looking in on the other side of it, maybe it makes sense why you should talk about the legacy life. That's something you guys need to worry about with your family. Speak to my families, though, who are tuning in, who may not be leading multi-billion-dollar businesses. Why does this type of life matter to us as well?
Yeah, and I don't think you have to lead a large company at all. I think if you have a family, something's very important. We bring all of our co-managers in here, which are going to be managers in the future, and I talk to them. And one of the things that I say to everyone that comes in here, I said, it's easier for us to be successful at business than it is in our marriage. We Christians don't do too good in our marriage. We Christians don't do too good in raising our children. So I just said, we're going to be closed on Sunday. We're going to be closed at 8 o'clock. We're only going to be open 66 hours because more important than Hobby Lobby is your family. That's your legacy. That's one of your legacies, your family. And if they're going to serve the Lord, by the way, we're none perfect, but I think they're all serving the Lord. So that's my legacy. And then also, Hobby Lobby is not the important part. The important part is what we can do to tell other people about Christ, because that's our legacy. Legacy is about long term. Nothing's more long term than eternity. So those are the things that we want to commit ourselves to. So if you follow our family and what we do, it's about God's word and man. So those are the two things, the only two things eternal that we want to commit ourselves to. And that's what we try to do.
So I took pretty copious notes while I was rolling through your book. And one of the very first things I wrote down, then underlined it twice, was this: we own nothing. God entrusts us for a vapor of time. That doesn't sound like what I've been hearing in the marketplace today. It seems like everything that is ours, we earned, and it is uniquely ours to possess. So tell me about that quote. We own nothing. God entrusts us for a vapor of time.
Well, if we think about it much at all, we know that it's not hard because that's what God's word says. God's word says he owns everything. And there was a period of time in my life when I was creating something that had a tremendous amount of value. And it was before I knew Bill, and what am I going to do with this tremendous, tremendous value? How do I not mess my family up? How do I not ruin my family? Not that you're going to ruin a family with a lot of, but you can ruin your family with a lot of wealth. And so
Mm.
I was under tremendous, 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 one of the most tremendous times in my life of pressure to know what to do with the wealth that God has given us. And we called in people that have written books about how to handle wealth and how to do it. And they were asking me to do the same thing as the world would ask me to do. Give it to your kids, and they would give it to their kids. And I could not sleep at night. I could not sleep. As I said, it was the most terrible time in my life. And I was in the backyard praying when God asked me a question that solved all of my problems. And he asked me the question, what would you do if the Jones family owned Hobby Lobby? And so I said, God, I have nothing to give. He says, you got it. You have nothing to give. You have nothing to give. You are a steward. And from that day on, we became steward. God owns it. We're the stewards of it. In our family, there's no family member that gets one penny that they don't earn. Everybody earns what they get because it is not ours. Now, how do we get there? It's just real simple. It's in the Bible. He owns everything, not just our finance, but our time, our talents. And so that's how we've tried to be good stewards with whatever God has given us to be stewards of.
Bill, I wrote down one of your quotes. Legacy is not what we leave behind. Legacy is what we set in motion.
Yeah, I come from the legal background. I practiced law, actually did some estate planning work in the law firm world. And you'll hear that line, legacy is what we leave behind. And that's an easy thing to say because you can say, leave it behind and let everybody else figure it out. But that's actually not a true statement. All of us are setting in motion something really powerful. Certainly, as people of faith, what we look forward to is that day in heaven where we'll have that great reunion with our friends, our family, the people around us, people that we've influenced. That's what we're setting in motion. And that's why David stresses this importance so much is that the greatest legacy that we can invest in is our kids and our family, and that they would know Christ and all the other people around us, because that's what we're going to see. That is the great fruit that we get to look forward to.
You also wrote, tied to that, that the great enemy of legacy is short-term thinking. Man, we live in a society that is immediate gratification. So how do these two things somehow come together, where we get what we want immediately, and yet you remind us that the great enemy of legacy is our short-term thinking.
Yeah, I mean the unfortunately in today's world, if you own a business, the whole mantra is let's build it to sell it. Even if you don't own a business, the idea is that your long-term goal is retirement, so you can retire and go sit on a beach somewhere. I don't know how people end up with that. I mean, I'm not saying retirement's bad, but David says it sometimes. He says, if you're going to retire, retire to something because we were meant to bear fruit. We were meant to
Right.
do something, to create, to produce. So all of that, this Western world of retirement is very, very short-term thinking. If you go to other parts of the world, you'll literally see families talk about the idea that they are preparing the field, they are preparing the company or whatever it is that they're doing for their grandchildren, not just their children. They're actually setting up something their grandchildren, great grandchildren can continue to grow and to cultivate. That's much longer term thinking. We just don't think like that here in America.
When did that begin to fade? Because when you look at the little wagons moving west, man, for the most part, none of those leaders were doing that for themselves. It was all for the little ones in the back of the wagons and the little ones that they would one day rear themselves. So there was certainly a time when everybody was thinking second, third, fourth generation behind them.
Yeah, I mean, the move from agrarian farming to an industrialized society actually is where much of there's some great sociological work out there, John, so I'm just not making this stuff up. But by the time you get to late industrialization stage and certainly post World War II, where America becomes extremely prosperous, everything became focused upon me. It's what do I get, and how much am I going to get paid and what's my retirement? And again, David talks a lot about this idea is that, man, if you're in that place where you're thinking
Right.
about hey, how much am I going to benefit? We're in a dangerous place. But when you're in this place and you say, I'm a steward, I'm a caretaker of whatever God's given me, not only for this moment, but for generations to come, it is a radical mindset shift.
David, tell me the Frankie Valley story.
Well, I try not to tell all these stories because Bill then prints them in a book. But my aunt sent me, because we had no money, she sent me a clarinet. Now, a clarinet just squeaks, okay? And there was 8 of us that played the clarinet, and you try out to see who's first chair. There was 7 ladies, 7 girls, and me, and I was last chair. But in the band, there was this guy that played the trumpet. He was first chair, and his pants always had creases in them, and he had these nice rings. And I just didn't like him. I mean, I'm a preacher's son. I didn't learn anything. I just didn't like the guy. I mean, he dressed too nice. He was first chair. I was last chair. So what do you do? Well, I'll just whip him. Well, so I squirted him with the gun and he knocked me out. So that was my story. And so I hope I learned a lot from that. But by the way, I became the tuba player and I became first chair tuba player. And I said that was because it just took a lot of hot air and I can do that. So clarinet, no. A tuba, yes. So anyway, that's part of the story is I did become first chair as a tuba player. But that's my not so pastor kid type story, is I didn't
I,
learn a lot
I
early on.
appreciate the stories you shared about normal humanity.
Yeah,
I mean, it sounds like a pretty ordinary story right there. It
yeah,
humanized you, man, and it
yeah,
made you want to turn the pages. You also shared a little story about Sweden planting oak trees for their fleets,
yeah,
and yet ultimately became something they weren't expecting.
right.
Share that story, and why does it matter to today's readers?
I think it matters that what Bill was talking about is we think too short term sometimes. We need to think longer term. And I think that's what we're trying to do with the family that we have great grandchildren and we need to be thinking intentionally about our family and what are we growing in our family and hope we're growing kids that tell people and do the same thing we're wanting to do.
So you help families through this book and through your work think long term, 150 years downstream. That's that's fairly long term. It's almost eternal in the way you begin shaping them toward this long view. And yet soccer practice and the uniform's dirty and we got to get food on. And so we are in this constant tension between thinking long term and just trying to keep the fires from burning down the entire house. Help busy families, and I'm one of them, man, help busy families manage that long term eternal lens, 150-year idea, and that idea of, and we have a real life to live right now.
I think in terms of when I was in high school, then I think in terms of when I had four kids at home and what you're talking about, I hope that each one of us moves in that direction. I don't know that I'm where I was when I was raising four kids, where every year we would go out and we'd take a Coleman trailer and pop it up, and we had no money, but we enjoyed each other. We did enjoy the family. I don't know that it was an intense in me as now that my kids are raised. I do things with them from time to time, but all of a sudden it seems like as we get more time, as we get older, maybe we should be there at the beginning. But for me, I see myself moving in that direction as I get older. And when
Mm.
you're at 62 years old, you're getting a lot closer to thinking that way than when you did when you were just trying to make Hobby Lobby work and it wasn't even working. So there is that process that you just don't go from one place to the other. But hopefully we're all moving in a direction that God has a plan for our life, and we're trying to find out what that is and move more into that plan as the years go on.
And Bill, it sounded like you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to add some observation too, just from looking at David's family. They were very intentional, even about how they raised their kids. And so now what we're seeing, John, are the rhythms that families really need to put in place to be successful. If you go back and look at the Jewish family, as a for instance, the Jewish family is very intentional about how they teach their young kids. From birth to age 5, they focus on two things. And those two things are storytelling from the Bible. And then second, it is this idea of Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. It's the idea of look up and then let's learn the stories. From ages 5 to 10, there's an equal intentionality built around the vision, mission, values of the family. It's built around, if you will, the Ten Commandments, the code of conduct, the way of life. And so there really can be intentionality around young families because it's tied into that Deuteronomy 6 verse. And the Deuteronomy 6 passage talks about this idea about talk about these things, your vision, your mission, your values, your code of conduct, the way that you live when you get up, when you lie down, when you're walking by the way. Just do it all the time. And that's what families need to do because sometimes I just think in the day-to-day life, just like you mentioned, running to soccer practice, it's easy to be so focused on that, but how do you make it part of that daily, weekly, monthly rhythm?
Mm. So businesses spend a lot of time and frequently a lot of money getting clear on the mission, vision, and value. If it's lived out, it's transformational. I know very few families who do the same. Tell me why it matters, and then help our listeners and viewers take some baby steps toward getting clear on their mission and their vision and their values and their code of conduct.
It is the first and simplest thing that we've seen families do is that if you just define your 5 values. Now, David's family has 3, but if you define your 5, then and you just start talking about those values, whether it's at breakfast, it's dinner time, again, if it's on your way. I've gotten videos from people where their kids are strapped into their car seat and they're going over family values. But if you do that, there's actual research out there among the 100-year families that tell us if you do just that minimum, you have that much greater likelihood of succeeding where your kids are not going to walk away from those values because values are protective and they're attractive at the same time.
Would
So
you give me an example of you mentioned David has 3, others have 5, some might have 1. What give me an example of a value that maybe a kid in a car seat was talking about with their dad?
So the kind of classic set of values, there's an upward value, faith. So, And the idea is, hey, we're looking upward. God is at the center of our life. A second value that people often have is family. So faith, family, integrity, generosity, gratitude. FIG, as an acronym, is often a common set of values that we'll see people look up to. But its idea is let's look up, let's look at the relationships, and then let's have some aspirational character kind of values that people should have.
David, how does any of this guide an actual decision you make as a family?
Well, I think the first thing possibly in asking the question that we need to know that God has a purpose for our life. We need to know some things. So, by the way, running Hobby Lobby, I try to keep it as simple as possible. And by the way, that takes a lot of work to keep it simple. And I think life is the same way. And I think you have to be intentional. I mean, as you're raising kids, there's a lot of pull, but there you have to stop long enough to say, look, this is fine. There's a balance. But at the same time, I don't want to miss God's calling on my life. A lot of people don't know what their calling is. I think it's because God doesn't tell them because they're not going to do it anyway. But I think someone that wants to know what is my calling, you're going to find it. And knowing what that calling is, I think moves you in the right direction. And I don't know that any of us, not me, moves from where you know you're supposed to be to where you're supposed to be. For me, it's been a process. And I think, as I said earlier, I think it's a process when you're really, really busy with your family and you got kids and you got a lot of things going on, but somewhere we need to know that we have a greater purpose than just doing life here, we're doing this vapor. And that's what we're doing. We're doing vapor. God has something bigger in mind for us.
You wrote about repairing the past, and I'm looking at both of you right now. So whoever wants to grab this question, it's a quote, and I'd like you to tell me why it matters. So here it comes. Only those who navigate the waters of conflict will succeed for generations to come.
Yeah, David and I have hosted CEO events for leaders around the country now for a long time, 20 years, I think that we've had it. And unfortunately, John, we have a lot of these leaders who walk into us sometimes in the midst of great trouble with their families, their companies. We had one guy, I don't know if you remember him, David, but he walked in and they'd had 47 lawsuits among their family over the family business. And so it's just the nature of who we are to have conflict. But the problem for most families is they just do not know how to navigate it well. And so some of what we try to say is you got to have some rules of behavior. We call it a code of conduct. And you got to agree that we're going to move towards restoration. I mean, again, Dave and I have seen so many of these stories, hundreds of these stories, unfortunately, of people not in good places just because they can't deal with their conflict.
You've written in the book about conflict and cancer and loss and disappointment. How do you know when to pivot that legacy movement that you're making forward? How do you know when to let go of it? How do you know when it's your will or God's will? When it feels like everything's coming at you and pressing down, how do you know when it's time to let go or when to push through?
I don't know that that's real easy to answer, but I think that I could say in most cases, I just want to let go. I have something I try to do. The Bible says, pray without ceasing. So I try to do that. I try to come to work every day asking God for direction. I don't want my will. I want his will. And then pray without ceasing. And I also like to know he's with me always. So while I'm praying, I know he's right here. He's not this old guy up in the sky. And then the other scripture that I bring in is, you have not because you ask not. But what am I asking for is very, very important. So I think in terms of conflict in your life, I think one that I go back to sometimes, and it might have been in the book, in 1985 when we had an oil crisis here, and it looks like we're going to crash as a family, as a business. We're losing money. The banks threaten to foreclose on us. And where that was good for me was the fact that I found myself physically, literally under my desk, just crying out to God, because I'm at a point where everybody's going to lose their job. My family was depending on this, and I had nothing. It was one of the worst days of my life, but it was also good because I found myself taking too much credit for, we had always done well at TG&Y, then Hobby Lobby, everything was upward going, and then it crashed. And that was a very, very important time in my life. Now, I don't think you can solve the problem with being too prideful with one instant, but I think I go back to that sometimes, and I try to remember that God owns it all. Without him, I'm nothing. I can do nothing. So I try to do that as much as I possibly can. But I needed that time in my life at that time as a preacher's son. I should have known better, but I was too prideful, and God had dealt with me in that crisis in my life.
Mm. Bill, about half of adult siblings have no relationship with their siblings. That might not be dozens of lawsuits going back and forth, but it is a reminder that Thanksgiving usually has a few empty chairs. And when they are filled, there usually is some tension in the room or some yelling in the room. You've been working with families for a long time. What are some practical steps that you encourage families to take to resolve those conflicts and to come back together and to love one another for maybe not how they become who you wish they were, but for love them as they are?
Yeah, the simple thing that, as I say, we usually say if you recognize that we are all broken and just humble yourself. And so, one of the first simple things that people can do when they come to that Thanksgiving dinner table is literally physically lower yourself and lower your voice, lower your tone of voice, and then listen to understand versus listening to respond.
Mm.
And when you listen to understand, you'll ask more questions. Say, hey, John, how's it going? And then I'll let you talk. And it's like, man, is there more to that? Can we hear more? That's that Proverbs 15:1 idea that a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word, tone of voice, one word can stir up that anger. And so that's the simplest technique. Lower yourself and lower your tone of voice, and then listen to understand.
Bill, when the families who check out this book and step through the pages, put the book down and start living it, how do you hope fundamentally their life is different afterwards than before? What do you want to stoke within them, and how do you want not only them to be changed, but the generations behind them?
Yeah, we're hoping that we really will change the trajectory of families around the globe for generations to come. We're not going to be as haphazard as previous generations where we delegate our family and our lives away. We're going to be good stewards, as David says. We're really going to work on that because we know that if we ingrain those values in, we will set in motion a powerful legacy for those generations to come.
David, one of the final questions will be tethered your way, man. So what is that powerful legacy that you hope to leave behind for your children and grandchildren and great grandchildren and 50,000 leaders within Hobby Lobby and those listening to our conversation today?
I think the first thing that I would like to tell all of us, me included, all of us, is to be very family oriented, because sometimes we're just too tied to our jobs and our success, but family is more important. And so that's what we try to tell the co-managers, as I said, that there's something more important than Hobby Lobby. So I think the family is very, very important. And so I would like for them from this book to say family is important. When Barbara and I first got married, we said we want to do three things. Now we should have said five, but we said three. We should have said one of the things is we want to serve the Lord, but we didn't even go there. I guess because we felt like we were going to do that anyway. But we said we want to make sure that we have a marriage that God would be pleased with for life. We wanted our children to serve God. And whatever God gives us is our work. We want to be successful. But since that time, I've said, I'm going to add something else. I want my children's children to serve the Lord. And by the way, I want my children's children to serve the Lord. And by the way, I want to tell as many people about Christ as I can. So those are the things that we've tried to come alongside in our marriage and in our time, and we think it's important for all of us. And that's why I spend a lot of time with our co-managers talking to them about something more important than Hobby Lobby, and that's their family. And I think that's where we get the greatest amount of success in our legacy, and then telling others the story as well.
David, you have 50,000 leaders, man, that you serve alongside, whose lives you help impact through your leadership and stewardship. One of them is a lady I work down the hall from who helps manage our podcast. She worked with you for several years and loved it. Is there a story, though, of one of your colleagues that when you think about when you're having one of those days that just, it's not going the way you wish, that you go back to the story and it reminds you, and yet this is why I strive forward? Is there one of your colleagues that you serve that reminds you of that and fills your bucket when it seems to be running dry?
You know, when I get a letter like that, I get some, I keep them. So I've got some right by my desk. I said, I'm going to pull this letter out because this person, we made a difference in their life. Our life has made a difference in their life. We have those letters that someone just says, uh, because of your family, we're serving the Lord. So we have a lot of those stories because we're not ashamed. We don't want to be ashamed of the gospel. So we want our 50,000 people, even though they're out in the field in 48 states, we want to do all we can to minister to them the best we can. And they know the ministries we're involved in, and they're involved. We can't do it without them. So we want them to know they're coming alongside us and they're helping us in these ministries. And by the way, we have the best help in the world because they want to be a part of what we're doing. And so we thank God for every one of the 50,000 employees.
Well, the book is called The Legacy Life. I loved reading through it. So do my colleagues who have read it down the hall. We have 7 questions that tether every one of our podcasts together. I'm going to go back and forth between the two of you, and then I'll let both of you answer the 7th question. So how about we start with Bill? Bill, what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Probably the book by John Piper, Don't Waste Your Life.
And in a sentence, what will we learn when we check out the book, Do Not Waste Your Life?
It's this whole theme built around don't waste your life on the stuff of this life. Look towards building a life in eternity.
David, what is one positive characteristic, one beautiful trait that you possessed as a little boy growing up, but you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
Oh, no one's ever asked me that question. As a little boy, I have a lot of traits that I wouldn't want to tell you about more than I do that I do. I think one of the things that I've always had is just not giving up. You know, if you fail, we all fail. Okay. And so it doesn't bother me to fail so much. I mean, because just get up and do it over and over and over. So I think that is a part of me. By the way, when I was growing up, we had no toys. We made our toys. We would go out and dig a big ditch and put tin over it and put dirt over that, and you wouldn't know where it was. There's a little hole and there's big rooms. And so we did a lot of things that out of stuff that just you just found. But that helped us, by the way. I look back on it, that helped us be creative because I had nothing to work with. So we just saw the stuff that was in the backyards in other people's backyards, but just creating things out of nothing. We
Sounds
had,
very familiar, man.
yeah, yeah.
Bill, if your home caught fire and all living things are out and you have an opportunity of running back in and grabbing one thing that matters to you, what's the one physical item you would grab?
Well, a couple things. We have a Bible Hall of Fame. So we have some of the key Bibles in the history of our family, some of the ones where I came to know Christ, my study of the Bible. So that's one. But then we still have family pictures. So the family albums, the things that represent the family story.
So you got the Bibles in your right hand and you got the photos in your left and you're running out with smoke behind you, man. It's a picture I can imagine. If you could sit on a bench and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, David, who would you like to be seated next to?
I think it would be DC, the one that created Walmart, Sam Walton. I've never had a time to talk with him, so that would be the person I think I would like to talk to because I'm interested in retail, because I'm interested in what it can create.
Hmm. What's the best advice you've ever received, Bill High? So the best advice you've ever received is,
Pretty simple. When my dad died, my baseball coach at the time, he just said, chin up, Willie, chin up.
wow, that's hard to hear, man. Was it as hard to hear for a boy as it is even for me? I'm 48 and hearing that would be hard. So what was it like for you to hear that when you were 12?
It actually, I do remember it very clearly. I was looking down and I was sitting in the pew. We were getting ready to start the church service. And he essentially just encouraged me to lift up my eyes and say, it's going to be okay.
David Green, what advice would you give yourself at age 20?
At age 20, I think I would try to move quicker than I did in walking with the Lord and asking Him for advice because God gave all of us a certain amount of abilities and talents. But I think when He blesses it and we could walk alongside Him, it just takes it to another level. And I think I would be a little bit quicker. It's been a process, but I think I would have been there a little bit. I should have been there a little bit earlier.
So now a final question for both of you. We'll start with Bill. Bill, hi. It has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
It would be consistent with the theme of this book, which is he lived a legacy life.
David Green, it has been said, brother, that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
That he loves his family and he wants to tell as many people about Jesus as he possibly can.
Well, undoubtedly, David Green did love his family, did a phenomenal job telling as many people about Jesus as he possibly could. And indeed, Bill Hyde did live the legacy life and invite you to do likewise. My friends, you're listening to a conversation between John O'Leary and his friends David Green and Bill Hyde. They are the authors of The Legacy Life. My name is John O'Leary, and today is our day. What a gift. Live inspired.